Lesson 5-12, Properties of Rational Numbers. So in this video, we're just going to be reviewing some of the properties that we used earlier in the year with multiplying with rational numbers. So some of the properties we've gone through. We've gone through the commutative property. The commutative property just means if for addition, you switch the addends around and it's still going to equal the same answer. With multiplication, you switch the factors around and it's still going to equal it. You cannot have a commutative property for subtraction and division because the answers will not be the same. But for the focus of this lesson, we are only looking at addition and multiplication. The associative property means the order of the addends and the factors stay the same. The only difference is the parentheses that it's grouped together moves from between one group of numbers and the second group of numbers. So an example is a plus parentheses b plus c is going to give you the same answer if you did parentheses a plus b and then add c. Same thing with the multiplication. The distributive property just means take the factor on the outside and multiply it by every term on the inside, and you would get a plus b times a plus c. Now the identity for addition just means any number added to 0 is always going to be itself. So a plus 0 is still going to give you a. And the multiplicative property for identity would mean any number times 1 besides 0 is still going to give you that number. Other properties that we're going to focus in on today is the zero property of multiplication, which just means the product of 0 and any number is still going to be 0. The multiplicative property of -1 is the product of -1 and any number besides 0 is the inverse of that number. Anytime you hear the inverse, think the opposite. So the opposite of addition is subtraction, or the opposite of a positive is a negative. So you're just switching the sign from a positive to a negative or a negative to a positive. So an example would be like if I said -4 times -1, that's going to give us a positive 4. And a positive 4 is the opposite of a -4. The inverse property of addition just says the additive inverse or the opposite of a number. And the inverse property of multiplication just says you're going to write that as the reciprocal of that number. So going back to the inverse property of addition, if you take a number and you add its inverse or add its opposite, it always equals 0. For the inverse property of multiplication, if you take a number and multiply it by its reciprocal, it's always going to equal a positive 1. So let's take a look at some examples. Here we want to identify the property being used. So here we have parentheses -1/8 plus 1/5 and parentheses plus 2 1/4 is going to be the same as -1/8 plus parentheses 1/5 plus 2 1/4. You'll notice the numbers stay the same in same order on both sides of the equal sign. The only thing that moved was the parentheses, but it does not change the answer because they're all addition. This would be the associative property. And this would be the associative property of addition. This next one, we have -4/9 times 3/5, which is the same as 3/5 times -4/9. I flipped the factors around. The answer still stays the same. So this would be the commutative property of multiplication. Next, I have -2/3 times a -3/2, and that's going to equal 1. Well, if I have a fraction multiplied by the reciprocal and that equals 1, this would be the inverse of multiplication. Next, we have 1 equals 1/8 times 8. Well, 8 is the reciprocal of 1/8, and when you multiply them together, it gives you 1. So this would be the inverse of multiplication. Next, what value for the variable makes each sentence true, and then name the property. So here, if I look on the left side, -4/5 times 1/4 has to equal 1/4 times g. Well, if I already have 1/4 the same on both sides, that means g has to equal the other factor, which g is going to equal a -4/5, and the property is going to be the commutative property of multiplication. And all they did was just switch the factors around. This next one, 2 ninths plus 0 equals h. Well, h has to equal 2 ninths because anything added to 0 is itself. That is the identity property of addition. And then the next one, I have 3/5 times parentheses 5 minus 3/10 equals 3/5 times 5 minus 3/5 times k. We are distributing here. So k would have to be 3/10 and the property distributive. And our last ones, here we're just going to be multiplying them. So here we got 2 times 2 is 4 plus 1 is 5. So this is 5 halves times negative 14 over 1. I can simplify by dividing a 2 here and divided by 2 here. 5 times negative 7 is negative 35. Next, I have 3 1/2 times 2/3. This will be 7 halves times 2/3. The 2's divide out, and I'm left with 7/3. So that is our lesson on properties of rational numbers.